speaker is a Deputy Executive Director of the Government Procurement Policy Board Technical Support Office, overseeing its legal and research division. Prior to being designated as one of the Deputy Executive Directors of the GPPB TSO, she held the position of the Head of the Capacity Development Division of the GPPB TSO and the Division Chief of the Legal Service and Chair of the BAC Technical Working Group of the Public-Private Partnership Center. She acts as resource speaker or lecturer on the government procurement law and training activities of various government agencies. She obtained her Juris Doctor degree from the Ateneo de Manila University School of Law in 2004, and she was admitted in the Philippine Bar in 2005. She likewise attended procurement courses of the Asian Institute of Management in the Philippines and through the United States Trade and Development Authority held in Manila and in Washington, D.C. I am proud to present our resource speaker, Attorney Melissa A. Santiago Yan.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah. So, can you hear me naman?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear
Yes,
you.
yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just
Yes, ma'am.
making sure.
Loud and clear.
Can you see my presentation? Share. Sorry, first time to use Google Meet for my presentation. So, I just want to know if you can see my presentation.
Hi ma'am, may blank screen pa po siya.
Ha?
Black po.
Blank screen.
Blank pa
blank
lang
screen.
siya. Okay, wait.
Okay na po ma'am.
So okay.
Ay,
Okay
bumalik
na.
siya.
Ayan. So, hindi
Yan
ko
na.
kayo makikita. Okay.
Okay na.
Okay na, ma'am.
Okay, so nakikita niya naman lahat. Sige. Yeah. So, yeah, let's start. So this afternoon, I'll be discussing with all of you the application of domestic preference in the procurement of COVID-19 related goods. So, very specific po yung ating topic for this afternoon because ito yung kumbaga pinaka-relevant din dun sa procurement activities that the PS will undertake under the Bayanihan 2 procurement provision. So, we will be explaining then yung background, ano rin yung reason why why the board adopted this set of procurement rules, why the board adopted this set of rules for the domestic preference, taking in mind, of course, the objective of the Bayanihan 2 or the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act or RA or Republic Act number 11494. Yan. So as mentioned earlier, all questions will be answered during the open forum. So I will be discussing the presentation po muna. Yan. So yeah. As a background, so I have mentioned already the law. So we have, or the Congress recently enacted Republic Act number 11494, or the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act, or what we refer to as the Bayanihan 2, to differentiate from the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act, or the Bayanihan 1, which was applicable at during the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. So from the title of the law itself, to recover as one act, meaning meron pong mga activities or mga projects or programs that are implemented through the law that focuses not just on the abatement of the spread of coronavirus disease 2019, but more of how we would be able to recover already. So may mga activities or projects or programs po ang government that focus on recovery. So that's why may mga changes din po tayo dun sa procurement provisions natin kasi you would be able to compare it being of course yung ating central procurement agency when it comes to CSE or common use supplies and equipment. So yung procedures that we were able to implement for Bayanihan 1 may maiiba po kasi for Bayanihan 2. Now, similar with the Bayanihan 1, it identified specific procurement projects. So very specific po siya with specific items and services. So goods infra consulting services, very specific lang po. Hindi yung kamukha ng RA 9184 na it covers all goods infra consulting services already. So it's exempt specific procurement projects related to COVID-19 response from the provisions of RA 9184, specifically yung provisions on competitive bidding. However, of course, may mga provisions po kasi under Section 4U of RA 11494 that would embed still or meron po kasing provisions on domestic preference and also competitive procurement procedures. That's why ito po yung kinalabasan ng rules that we have that the board adopted for this particular procurement provision under the Bayanihan 2. So as mentioned and as you can see in the screen, it highlights that the procurement of COVID-19 related goods. So emphasis on goods. So ini-exclude po niya yung services of course and yung mga infra na and other and consulting services that may be procured under Section 4U of RA 11494. So these are COVID-19 related goods that are produced, made, or manufactured in the Philippines shall be given the domestic preference. So subject, of course, to competitive procurement procedures. So yun po yung kumbaga salient feature ng Bayanihan to procurement provision that we do not have in the Bayanihan 1. So what are the items for COVID-19 response? So what we have highlighted here on the presentation are items or yung mga goods po that would be covered by this procedure or yung pati po ng domestic preference rule po natin. So we have of course yung mga PPEs, testing kits, surgical equipment and supplies, medical supplies, tools and consumables, laboratory equipment and its reagents. So most of these are enumerated po under Section 4U, yung first item. And then, we also have kasi, under the enumerated procurement projects, yung establishment, construction, and operation of medical facilities. So, although this is infrastructure project, we all know that when it comes to infrastructure project or civil works, mixed type of procurement siya. So, it would depend on the agency on how they would implement an infrastructure project, especially kung small infra project. Pwede po kasing, if they have the capacity or capability, some would, of course, parang separate the procurement of goods. So, if they're gonna procure separately the goods under this particular type of project, establishment, construction, and operation of medical facilities, then domestic preference may also apply. So, but to highlight, what we are trying to emphasize here is that the rule on domestic preference is applicable only to the procurement of goods. So it would necessarily apply only to those items or goods that were indicated po in our Section 4U. Yeah. So what is domestic preference? So alam ko po na marami po sa atin sa PS matagal ng procurement practitioner. So we have perhaps heard about domestic preference already. Although this is not a new concept, it is way, way, way beyond RA 9184, in fact. So because this is the domestic preference rule that we have right now is embedded in a very old law which has not been repealed yet, which is Commonwealth Act 138. CA 138. So it has been recognized with the enactment of RA 9184, the CA 138. So meron pa rin po tayong domestic preference. So outside the Bayanihan 2 Act, even if we do not have the procurement provision under the Bayanihan 2, meron po tayong tinatawag na domestic preference under RA 9184. Now, nung inanak po yung RA 9184 in 2003, and it recognizes domestic preference rule under CA 138, dalawa po yung klase ng domestic preference that was being implemented before. Number one is a preference for domestic entities. So merong definition as to domestic entities. Makikita nyo pa rin yan sa 2016 IRR. Ano yung mga domestic entities that would be that would have domestic preference. And then we have also one scenario wherein there's domestic preference for what we call domestic bidders or yung domestic bid. Na yun yung i-discuss ko po ngayon. Now, when the Philippine Competition Act was enacted by Congress, tinatch nyo po or meron po siyang provision sa CA 138 na rinipil pero hindi po niya totally rinipil yung law. So, rinipil niya po yung provision as to domestic preference for domestic entities. Wala na po yun. So, ang natira na lang is domestic preference for domestic bidders. So, kaya when we had po also the revision of the 2016 IRR, we embedded that also. Wala na po yung domestic preference to domestic entities, yung 75% Filipino. Wala na po. We don't look at the citizenship or the nationality of the entity. What we look at is the product or the bid or the articles, materials, or supplies that they are offering. That's why when we talk about domestic preference right now, we talk about yung product itself. So pwede pong ang isang company, di ba, whether foreign or local company, pwede siyang mag-offer ng marami pong produkto or pwedeng marami siyang domestic bidders na preference certificate because it relates to the product, not to the company itself. Now, so as mentioned, this domestic preference rule is not something new. So it is under the rules for domestic preference under RA 9184 and its 2016 IRR is found in section 43. So nandun po siya. So under our rules, even if we don't have yet po yung mga free trade agreements that opens up market access or market access to foreign bidders or to certain countries po when it comes to government procurement, under our rules, there are still instances wherein foreign bidders would be able to participate, especially for goods. So for goods, four instances po yan. Number one, when there would be monopoly, or number two, restraint of trade, di po ba? Number three, if there's reciprocity, so the country or the bidder, di ba, foreign bidder, is from a country wherein they are offering reciprocity or pwede po tayo din mag-join sa kanila for that certain product as a bidder. Or number four, if there's an existing international agreement or free trade agreement that would allow us or would open our market to foreign bidders for a particular product. So yun yung four instances. But all of this would be subject to domestic preference. So kaya when you look at section 43, it highlights po yung when we say government procurement, it's open to all eligible bidders, both domestic and foreign sources. But yun nga, because of CA 138, procuring entities may give preference to the purchase of domestically produced and manufactured goods that meet the specified or desired quality. So under our section 43, nandun po yung rules on how we apply preference. And how do we how will a procuring entity like DBMPS, for example, would know na kailangan niyang mag-apply ng domestic preference for a particular bidding activity. So pagka po merong nag-present nung DTI certificate of yung domestic bidders preference, then that is the time that we will apply the rules for domestic preference. So as mentioned, we look at the product, or we look at the bid, or we look at the offer, not the supplier or not the manufacturer. So that's why there's a definition of what a domestic bid is versus what a foreign bid is. So when you say domestic bidder, diba, domestic bidder preference, you look at the offer. So any offer for bidding, may it be from domestic or foreign bidder of goods substantially from articles, materials, or supplies grown, produced, or manufactured in the Philippines. So, yun po yung dinedetermine ni DTI. Kaya po, humihingi sa kanya ng domestic bidder certificate because titingnan po niya yan through yung process niya under meron siyang guidelines for that whether a product is substantially from articles, materials, or supplies grown, produced, or manufactured in the Philippines. So as opposed to a foreign bid. So a foreign bid would be any offer of articles, materials, or supplies not manufactured or not to be manufactured in the Philippines. Or hindi po siya, di ba, substantially from articles, materials, or supplies grown, produced, or manufactured in the Philippines. So basically, yun po yung how we would apply domestic preference under RA 9184. And I will discuss later on ano rin ba yung difference under RA 9184 and under the Bayanihan 2 because meron pong difference po as to the rules on how we would apply domestic preference. Yeah. Considering also the intent and objective of Bayanihan 2 and also the intent and objective of RA 9184. So for Bayanihan 2, yan. If you would siguro ask us or ask the GPPB, especially yung if you would compare the procurement provision for Bayanihan 1 and then Bayanihan 2, bakit yung Bayanihan 2 parang mas medyo parang medyo nakaka-confuse? Or bakit parang yung sa Bayanihan 1, tiningnan natin na dapat mabilis, dapat madali, 'di ba? That's why the board adopted emergency procurement under the Bayanihan 1. And then why in Bayanihan 2, why did the board adopt competitive bidding process? 'Di ba? So siguro yun po yung unang katanungan natin. So yun nga as mentioned to highlight kasi section 4U of the Bayanihan 2 requires application of domestic preference and it's specified po of course that it is applied through the use of competitive procurement procedures. Kasi hindi po pwedeng magkaroon ng domestic preference kung emergency procurement po siya. Kasi there are rules po that you would have to follow for giving yung 15% margin of preference. In fact, when this was deliberated by Congress, this provision, what the GPPB really proposed po, parang to give you a background, we always comment po kasi on procurement provisions that are being proposed in Congress. What we were really proposing is that it's not really necessary because if we would adopt the domestic preference and then also the competitive bidding process, what we would say is that we just adopt RA 9184. So yun po syempre magiging position because it's basically there. There's no need to enact another procurement provision. And we also commented na even if we're gonna apply, for example, emergency procurement under the situation because we need efficiency, we need also, parang similar with Bayanihan 1, kailangan po mabilis. Yun naman pong if we want to, of course, if we want to further the interests of our domestic manufacturers and suppliers, hindi naman po kailangan ng domestic preference rule because we can embed that. So we could just highlight that that is the intent and objective of the law, and we could embed that in our technical specifications. Like we put in our technical specifications locally manufactured product or something like that, especially for specific products that we know na meron pong nagma-manufacture locally. Like for example, with a face mask, di ba meron na po tayong mga magagandang product po ngayon na locally manufactured like yung mga made of abaca and all those things. But of course, Congress deemed it proper to push for this domestic preference provision under a competitive procurement procedure. So ano po ba yung reason? So sabi ko nga, Bayanihan 1 is to heal. Bayanihan 2 is to recover. So part of the recovery plan is of course to make sure that we jumpstart the economy. So what do we want to do? we want to reduce the adverse impact of COVID-19 in the Philippine economy, particularly in the business activities and livelihood of local manufacturers and the micro, small, and medium enterprises. So what we want to do is not just to make sure that we procure effectively, but we make sure that we also somehow give, 'di ba, preference to our domestic manufacturers and suppliers, especially the micro, small, and medium enterprises that were deeply affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Ang dami po kasi 'di ba na nawalan na ng business or kailangan mag-shift ng kanilang business, 'di ba, mag-iba ng produkto kasi marami po yung hindi na kinakailangan. Like for example, for PPEs, 'di ba? Ang dami po natin sa fashion industry na hindi naman po 'yun yung dating market. But now with the COVID-19 pandemic, nag-shift po sila kasi 'yun yung kinakailangan or 'yun yung in demand. So kasi nawalan din po ng negosyo kasi 'di ba sa fashion industry, isa rin ang deeply affected is the event industry. So yung mga ganun po na deeply affected or adversely impacted by the COVID-19. So that is a reason why Congress really pushed for this domestic preference rule. Yeah. So after the enactment of RA 11494, so GPPB resolution issued 19-2020 to provide for the rules that would make sure that we effectively implement the procurement profession under section 4U of RA 11494. So that would be your guidepost when you are implementing Bayanihan to procurement activities. So as mentioned, it provides for the rules in the conduct of procurement of goods with application of domestic preference under the Bayanihan 2. So we want to ensure, yun po, number one, is to have the effective implementation of the domestic preference rule as a support mechanism for local manufacturers and micro, small, and medium enterprises in various sectors. And then of course, yun nga sabi ko kanina, we want to help jumpstart the local economy in the procurement of COVID-19 related goods covered under the Bayanihan 2. So if you would look at po kasi the Bayanihan 2 Act or the Bayanihan 2 Law, pag hinimay-himay po natin siya, marami of course provisions under the Bayanihan 2 that would help the different sectors, different industries to recover. Diba? Kasi nga, marami po, ramdam na po natin ngayon yung epekto ng COVID-19, not just of course in the health, but of course yung socio-economic impact po niya. So yun po yung isa na wala man pong direct subsidy for our manufacturers or suppliers when it comes to government procurement, but indirectly, diba, the government is somehow subsidizing them. So wala pong direct subsidy, it's just we're helping them kasi diba, the government is the prime market mover. Diba? Kaya nga po, government procurement is sometimes used as a tool in different aspects of parang implementing a project kasi yun na po yung sure na market, di ba? Sure na market po ng ating private sector. So sure na po tayo kasi nabibili po tayo ng mga gantong items. So we have to at least prefer our local manufacturers and or suppliers. Yan. So, of course, very important po to DBMPS is that even prior to the enactment of the Bayanihan 1 Act, yan. So, even before in-enact po ni Congress yung Bayanihan 1, nagkaroon na po ang GPPB ng resolution based also on the proposal of the DOH kasi DOH is a member also of the GPPB. So nag-propose na po kaagad si DOH anticipating po the effects of the pandemic, also the projects or activities that need to be implemented right away, diba, to abate po whatever the effects of the pandemic will have. Kaya po meron na po kaagad na list of common use supplies and equipment that are COVID-19 related products or items that were included in the CSE list last March. So this would include po yung mga PPE equipment like gloves, gowns, masks, goggles, and face shields. It would also include support and maintenance for laboratory and medical equipment, surgical equipment, and supplies. And then we also have identified certain medical supplies, tools, and consumables that are listed in our common use supplies and equipment list. Like alcohols, yan, matagal na po yan, ban available sa PS, sanitizers, tissue, Yan, thermometers, hand soap, detergent, sodium hypochlorite, cleaning materials, povidone iodine, and common medicines. And then we also have testing kits and other supplies and equipment as may be determined by the DOH and other relevant government agencies. So these are the ones that are included already in the common use supplies and equipment of the DBM procurement service, which have been reiterated also in Resolution 9-2020. But we have to siguro highlight kasi in the Bayanihan 1, it's ang na-include po sa section 4K po ng Bayanihan 1 is sodium hydrochloride. And I think what was included in the CSE list last time was also sodium hydrochloride. But in the Bayanihan 2, Congress changed that into sodium hypochlorite. And we have reiterated that as well in our CSE list under the 19-2020. So yun lang yung difference, I think, with the CSE list. Now, we also have po yung there was a proposal to include surgical equipment and supplies, laboratory equipment and its reagents, and then medical equipment and devices. These are all so listed in Section 4U of the Bayanihan 2. So there was a proposal na baka pwede nating include to sa CSE list para din mas mabilis. But of course, based also on a consultation with DBMPS, hindi po advisable that this be included because hindi naman po siya common, meaning hindi naman po lahat talaga din ng agencies would be needing this. Kasi very limited lang po din to hospitals, 'di ba, and medical facilities yung paggamit po nito. So it is better siguro na hindi po siya kasama sa CSE list, but siguro hindi rin naman po din-discount yung fact na if those procuring entities that would be needing this would want to tap pa rin PS, 'di ba? The proficiency of PS, the capability of PS as a procuring entity, ang nangyayari po is that we are tapping also PS as a procuring agent, as a procurement agent. So, pero hindi po siya as a CSE list. So, hindi po siya included sa CSE list po natin. Yan. So, now ang tanong po is ito din po yung isa sa mga changes that the GPPB adopted para din po kasi what we don't want din is yung parang in the issuance of policy, parang masabihan din po tayo na we are unduly restricting or we are also affecting the efficiency because there may be factors, especially po ngayon na pandemic, maraming factors that would affect the availability of products or items with a DBM procurement service. Of course, you would know that firsthand kasi kayo po yung nakaka-experience sa mga difficulties, di ba? Especially po kasi ang naging critical po lalo na sa pandemic na to or dito po sa state of calamity that we are presently that we are still experiencing is that different from the other state of calamities that we're very much used to already. Dito po kasi is that it's global, 'di ba? So there's also disruption in the global supply chain. Ang kinakailangan din bawat countries, nagkaroon din po sila or nag-impose din sila ng kanya-kanyang restrictions or kanya-kanyang mga preference din, yung mga domestic preference rules nila when it comes to this COVID-19 related products. So, meron po talagang instances siguro na hindi may iwasan na merong mga COVID-19 related goods that will not be available at the DBM procurement service. Especially ito po kasi yung mga hindi naman natin na-anticipate. Diba? With the way DBMPS, parang one of the tool that the DBMPS uses so that you could be able to forecast yung pinoprocure nyo for your CSE list is that you ask, di ba, yung the agencies would have to submit their APP-CSE. So it's it's a forecasting tool for you to know ano ba yung pangangailangan ng bawat ahensya for a CSE item for the entire year. So alam naman din po natin for the CSE, for the COVID-19 related goods, hindi po to na-anticipate. Kaya nga po na-include lang yung most of the items, COVID-19 related items last March. So nakapagpasa na ng APP-CSE ang mga ahensya last year pa, as early as last year for what they would be needing this year. So talagang merong mga certain factors that would affect the availability in a DBM procurement service. So, ang isa po kasing nakita namin na rin na parang nagiging issue is that yung because of the mandate that all procuring entities must procure from PS. Pagka po CSE ang pinag-uusapan, that is under AO 17 pa po, that was issued previously, di po ba? So before they are able to procure outside of PS, especially for example, if an agency would want to use shopping or would want to procure outside of PS through public bidding, kinakailangan pa po ng certificate of availability of stocks from the DBMPS para po meron siyang proof or document na ay hindi kasi available kay PS, so pwede kaming bumili outside, di ba? So ngayon under GPPB Resolution number 17-2020, the board, di ba, issued this resolution subject also to consultation with the DBMPS. So as conditions for procurement of CSE items not available in DBMPS, so it's not just limited to COVID-19 related goods but all CSE items. So kung halimbawa pong walang hindi na po kinakailangan ng SINAS if it's not available in the DBMPS. So procuring entities will just have to show na hindi po siya available from the PS. So as shown on your website. So pwede po, of course, procuring entities shall keep a record of the proof of unavailability of the CSE as shown in the PS website. So pwedeng screen cap or print screen of the web page showing the date and time that it was accessed. So that would be proof na hindi available, hindi na kailangan ng SINAS kasi alam po namin na dagdag work or trabaho din po siya, di ba? Dagdag layer din instead of all of us focusing on our different mandates and functions like we have to procure tapos instead of having to issue SINAS pa, so that would be enough na document or proof for procuring entities to procure outside of DBMPS. Now, what would be the applicable methods for COVID-19 related goods? So yun na nga, under GPPB Resolution 19-2020, this particular resolution focuses on COVID-19 related goods only. Kasi nga, dito po namin hinighlight yung domestic preference rules or provisions that have to be adopted based na rin po sa mandate ng Congress under Section 4U of RA 11494. So as mentioned in Resolution number 19-2020, so the board likewise adopted the use of shopping and negotiated procurement, small value procurement under Section 53.9 if we are talking about 1 million and below na ABC of these goods for NGAs, UCCs, GFIs, SUCs, and autonomous regional government. And of course, for LGUs, mga different po yung kanilang thresholds for shopping under Section 52.1B or yung tinatawag po nating regular shopping or for negotiated procurement under small value procurement under Section 53.9. And then, as a rule, for goods po, COVID-19 related goods, adopting the domestic preference rule, of course, that would be for ABC above 1 million pesos. So we follow the procedures under the 2016 revised IRR of RA 9184 on competitive bidding procedures. So sasabihin nyo siguro, ay, di ba nga in-exempt na ni Congress, bakit yun pa yung in-adopt ni GPPB? So sabi ko nga po kasi, the GPPB really deliberated on what procedure will be adopted for this, especially nga the law specifically provided for domestic preference and specifically provided for the adoption of competitive procurement procedures. So yun na lang, I would just like to highlight, so it's subject to additional conditions under GPPB Resolution 19-2020. So ibig sabihin, hindi naman po, kumbaga meron naman pong certain adjustments na in-adopt si board. Bakit po? Kasi we have to make sure we balance everything. Ito yung intent ng Congress, may domestic preference, intent din yan na may competitive procurement procedure, but at the same time, we also have to be reminded that the effectivity of the Bayanihan 2 Act is only until December 19, 2020. So yun po yung mga factors that we have to consider. So dalawa po kasi yung pwedeng kumbaga maging approach ng board. So pwede po kasing maging approach na sige, let's adopt a totally new procedure. Maglagay po tayo ng process na may competitive, magpapakita na it's still a competitive procurement procedure. But somehow, if you would look at the time frame and we will adopt a new procedure, then pwede po kasing mas matagalan, 'di po ba? Kasi lahat po tayo mag-a-adjust pa dun sa new procedures, 'di ba, na ina-adapt po ng board. So ito, madali na po para sa ating lahat, para sa procuring entity, para sa bidders, kasi po hindi na po natin kailangan pag-aralan pa yung mga kinakailangan na requirements. Meron lang konting adjustment that we have to make sure that we are aware of. So ano-ano po ba yung mga adjustment po na yun? So yun po yung ipapakita ko po mamaya. So yun po. So as mentioned, meron po kasi tayong shopping and small value procurement pa rin. Yan. Wait po. So may shopping and small value procurement pa rin po tayo. Sa shopping and small value procurement, meron po kasing tinatawag po. May tinatawag po kasi tayo na, sorry. Wait lang po Sorry po. So nakikita po natin yung screen ko. Sorry. Sorry, nagkaroon po ng problema. Yan. Nakikita po natin yung screen. Hello? Nakikita po
Yes,
po
yes,
natin.
ma'am.
Okay, sorry. Yan.
Yes, ma'am.
Ayan, so nandito na po tayo sa shopping and small value procurement. Meron po kasi tayong kailangan i-post sa GPPB online portal. Yun po yung if you would look at section for you, yun doon po naka-highlight yung ano ba yung mga information na dapat po nating i-post sa ating GPPB online portal. So we have po under shopping and small value procurement, hinighlight po namin na meron po kasi doon. Yeah, this is where it really gets confusing. That's why we wanted to make it effective also for all procuring entities. Pag makikita niyo po dun sa mga information na dapat pong i-post, kasama po dun yung certification that the procuring entity exerted all efforts to secure the most advantageous price to the government. So based on existing price data of agency or the Department of Trade and Industry or other relevant agencies. Or kung hindi po available po ito, based on a preliminary market scanning showing prevailing market prices and practice. So ito po kasi, if you would look at it, applicable lang po kasi ito kung alternative method of procurement or negotiated procurement. Kasi di ba even under section 48 po ng ating IRR of RA 9184, nandun po yung conditions for the use of alternative methods of procurement. So with that, kinakailangan po kasi yun ang laging caution sa atin. Pag negotiated procurement, pag alternative method of procurement, diba, we have to ensure that we gain or we get the most advantageous price with the government. Bakit po laging pinapaalala sa atin yun? Under RA 9184, even under Bayanihan 2. Kasi, pagka po negotiated procurement, diba, captured market na po si government. So, mas malaki po yung probability sa mga ganitong pong klase ng transaction na the private sector may take advantage of us. May ganun pong scenario kasi nga, limited yung competition. It's not subject to competitive bidding process. It's not subject to competition. So, even with small value procurement, with shopping, kahit na po sabihin natin we invite at least 3, diba? Somehow, nalilimit po kasi yung competition because it is based on invitation and shorten po yung timelines. So, that's why, if we're gonna use shopping or small value procurement, it's still required for us to have this certification, which the hope will be the one who's gonna issue this. So, pagka naman po competitive bidding process yung kung ating ina-adapt kasi nga uh, kailangan ng domestic preference provision, we don't need the certification anymore. So, applicable lang po ito for yung mga other services that or other projects that we will be implementing under the Bayanihan 2. But this and for goods and for small value procurement and shopping, but it's not applicable anymore for competitive bidding process. So wala na po 'yon. And then ito po yung pinaka-process for the competitive bidding. And ito po sa baba yung mga conditions that we had to make adjustments to. So we have here the domestic preference rule under the Bayanihan 2 is only applicable to procurement of COVID-19 related goods. So I stressed it earlier already. So undertaken through competitive bidding. So mag-a-apply lang po tayo ng domestic preference rule if we are using the competitive bidding process and we are procuring po COVID-19 related goods. So under the Bayanihan 2 kasi syempre po, yung mga outside the Bayanihan to procurement projects, and if we're gonna procure it under RA 9184, we also have the domestic preference rule under RA 9184 and its IRR. Pero iba po yung domestic preference provisions for that. So what is the important thing that we have to remember? So it adopts the rules and procedures of competitive bidding under RA 9184. So we have to look at the eligibility requirements, the process under RA 9184 and its 2016 revised IRR, but with few adjustments. So like for example, for advertisement and posting. So that's why if you would look at the screen, meron pong asterisk yung procurement opportunity in the PhilJEP's website. Isa po ang talaga po kasing highlighted na we are able to dispense with or we are able to adjust for this particular Bayanihan to procurement would be we dispense with the mandatory periods for each stage of the procurement and determine the specific procurement timelines as may be sufficient to properly conduct or participate in the procurement activity. So meaning, di po ba, yun po kasi yung unang iisipin na, bakit naman nag-competitive bidding process pa? Diba? So pinatagal, di paano tayo makakapag-procure in time for December 19, 2020? So ito po yung pwede nating i-adjust kasi hindi naman applicable talaga si RA 9184. So yung mga mandatory periods under RA 9184, like yung 3-month period po, di ba, from bid opening to award of contract na nasa law mismo ng RA 9184, yung 15-day period din po for the award of contract, di ba, under RA 9184, they are all dispensed with. So yung mga periods po for each stage of the procurement process, we are just guided by Annex C kung paano po natin siya iiklian. Diba? But of course, ang guidepost po natin is that we have to make sure na we still have enough time for each stage of the procurement process for the bidders to be able to prepare their responsive bid and for us, of course, for the procuring entity to be able to validate everything. All the submissions, mapopost qualify natin siya, may evaluate po natin lahat. Diba? Yun lang po yung guidepost. And of course, paano mo may masasabi na kailan ba mas maikli dapat? Kailan yung medyo mas mahaba? Tayo po rin po yung nakakaalam. And ang isang pwede po nating tingnan based on the complexity of the requirements, project requirements. Diba? Pag complex enough time for the bidders to be able to prepare the responsive bid and for us also to make sure that we have evaluated and post-qualified everything accordingly before we make the award of the contract. Now, for the posting of the procurement opportunity, so kaya po siya naka-asterisk kasi if, for example, diba, we are, kayo po yung mas expert on this, especially po yung sa PhilJEPs. For example po, we adopt the competitive bidding process. So based on the procuring entities assessment, hindi naman siya ganun complicated. So enough na yung 3 calendar days of posting, the procurement opportunity, the invitation to bid, for example. So pwede po kasi, diba, ang PhilJEPs po kasi is that, I think, ang pagkakaintindi ko po sa PhilJEPs, yung timelines po kasi rin niya, yung sa posting, nakasync po siya dun sa timelines, minimum maximum under RA 9184. So kung i-adapt po yung competitive bidding process sa PhilJeps, hindi po basta-basta pwedeng ma-shorten po ni procuring entity yung posting, for example, shorter than 7 calendar days, hindi niya mapopost or magkakaroon ng problema, hindi rin ma-adapt yung timelines na gusto niyang i-adapt based on the need for that particular procurement project. So anong mangyayari? Hindi rin po siya makakapag-post kay PhilJeps. So sabi ko nga, kasi if you would look at Section 4U, hindi naman po niya rin i-require, 'di ba? Sabi nga niya, exemption supposedly from RA 9184. So ang isa pong adjustment is that, kaya pag nakita niyo yung section, yung RA, yung resolution number 19-2020, sinasabi doon na for justifiable reasons, kung hindi makakapag-post kay PhilJeps, hindi na po kailangan i-post. So mag-post lang na lang po sa kay procuring entities website and the conspicuous place reserved for that purpose. And then at the latter part, of course, 'di ba? Meron po kasing yung post kinakailangang i-post sa GPPB online portal. But this is only for those COVID-19 related goods, 'di ba, na maaapektuhan. So yun po yun. Kaya naka-asterisk po si PhilJeps kasi kung halimbawa si procuring entity shinorten po niya at hindi po siya makakapag-post kay PhilJeps, okay lang po yun. Ang importante, ma-post pa rin po niya sa website niya, sa conspicuous place reserved for that purpose, and yung pong mga kinakailangan ma-post later on sa GPPB online portal. Yan. So similar po with the competitive bidding process under RA 9184, of course, we have these different stages: advertisement, pre-bid conference, receipt and opening of bids, evaluation of bids, post-qualification, award of contract. So yan po yung mga titingnan po natin kung ano-ano rin po yung mga timelines or periods na we could shorten. Like for example, for the post-qualification, yan po yung pinakamahaba po kasi ang period, 'di ba? Of all the different stages. So kung pwede po ng mas maikli, kung kakayanin naman po natin, ma-verify po natin lahat, then it would be up to us. Now, another adjustment po that we have highlighted here on the screen is the use of the revised omnibus warrant statement. So we just highlighted this because there are also certain revisions that were made in the omnibus warrant statement and of course in the relevant IRR provisions pertaining to the omnibus warrant statement provisions or yung mga undertakings po natin sa omnibus warrant statement in the IRR. So recently issued din po siya kasabay nung simplified bidding documents po natin na circular. So siguro po ma-highlight po dito kasi when we were attending also a budget hearing po sa Senate, 'di ba, isa po of contract to a company na hindi naman blacklisted pero yung isa sa kanyang incorporator or yung stockholder ay blacklisted as a sole proprietorship. So, yun po yung mga questions. And hindi naman po kasi siya talaga clearly defined under the blacklisting guidelines. Kasi ang clearly defined po sa blacklisting guidelines natin, yung usual na corporate, piercing the corporate veil na principle, hindi yung reverse corporate piercing. Kasi yung ganong scenario po na tinatawag natin, it's really more of parang reverse corporate piercing and hindi po siya talaga provided for under the uniform blacklisting guidelines that the GPPB has. So para po ma-address na rin po kaagad-agad yung gantong mga scenario para po hindi po rin na question yung mga procuring entities. So isa po yan sa una pong ina-address po natin for the omnibus warrant statement and the IRR provision on that. So it pertains to the blacklisting provision. And then, yan, we also highlighted here na we are allowed to use alternative documentary requirements under GPPB Resolution number 9-2020 because we are still under a state of calamity. So, bidders may post in lieu of yung performance security, their performance securing declaration. Yan. So, nandun naman siya, you refer to GPPB Resolution 9-2020. Yan. So, basically, same po ng process ng competitive bidding ng RA 9184. Ito lang po yung tatandaan natin because these are the conditions or these are the adjustments that the GPPB made under Resolution 19-2020. Now we go to domestic preference. So under RA 9184, ito po kasi yung rule, di ba? So we apply it kung ang lowest foreign bid natin, di ba? Ang lowest bid natin ay foreign bid. And then we have the next lowest bid that is a domestic bid. So may domestic component, meaning meron siyang DTI, Certificate of Domestic Bidders Preference. So it requires a procuring entity to give preference to domestic bidder, provided that the lowest foreign bid is increased by 15%. So tatanungin niyo siguro, bakit 15%? Yan. Yan, natanong po siya in our last webinar, but it was just in the FB Live. So we did not have the opportunity to give parang explanation. But for this particular provision under RA 9184, kaya po 15% siya, as mentioned, this is based in an old law. So if you would look at CA 138, may thresholds po doon. Meron pong mga rates talaga ng domestic preference. So right now, we are applying already the maximum margin of preference because that is a maximum margin of preference provided by CA 138. Sabi kasi doon, 15% po ang margin of preference pag ang bid po ay 2,000 pesos and above. So you can imagine how old the law that we are referring to. Kasi we're talking about 2,000 pesos pa po na bid. Yan. Ngayon, in the Bayanihan 2, in-adapt na rin po ng Congress yung same margin of preference, which is 15%. Yan. So the amount of the lowest domestic bid is still within the lowest foreign bid as increased. So meaning, para po tayo mag-apply ng domestic preference rule, one, meron siyang DTI certificate of domestic bidders preference. Number two, pag in-increase mo yung lowest foreign bid by 15%, yung bid ni domestic bidder papasok pa doon. Pag hindi siya pumasok doon, you cannot apply the domestic preference rule. Now, another rule po is that hindi po rin to automatic ma-award sa kanya. Kasi dapat may bid matching. So meaning, i-award natin kay lowest domestic bidder only kung papayag siya na yung award is in the amount of the lowest foreign bid. Kung hindi siya papayag, then we will just award to the lowest foreign bid. That is a domestic preference rule under RA 9184. So bakit po ganun yung rule? Kasi under RA 9184, 'di ba, we have yung dapat syempre LCRB and all those things. Sabi ko nga, iba po kasi yung intent under RA 9184. Iba naman yung intent under the Bayanihan 2. So bakit ko po hina-highlight yun? Kasi under the Bayanihan 2, the GPPB adopted a different rule so that we could really effectively give kumbaga preference to domestic bidder. Kasi nga ang sinasabi natin dito, somehow wala man direct subsidy, parang we are, 'di ba, giving incentive or somehow yun nga, we are preferring our domestic manufacturers or bidders. So wala pong bid matching in the application of domestic preference for the procurement of goods covered under Bayanihan 2. So kung mako-comply po yung four conditions that we have here on the screen, i-award po natin yan kay lowest calculated domestic bid based po dun sa, ang award would be based on the amount of the domestic bidder's bid price. So yun. So what are the conditions? So similar with yung ating 9184 domestic preference, nandun po yan sa section 4U, submission of a certification from the DTI that the articles of a manufacturer or supplier are substantially composed of articles, materials, or supplies grown, produced, manufactured in the Philippines. So yan yung number one. Number two, the lowest calculated bid is not more than 15% in excess of the lowest foreign bid. So similar din po yung margin of preference na ina-adapt. And then, ito po, the lowest calculated bid of the domestic bidder is not more than the approved budget for the contract. So why did we highlight this? Kasi wala pong bid matching po dito. So there may be instances po na pwedeng within the 15% pa rin siya, 'di ba? Pero mataas pala yung bid prices po nila, 'di ba? Tapos pag in-apply mo yung 15%, above na pala even if within 15% siya, above na pala siya ng ABC. So we had to be clear on this kasi nga sa Bayanihan to sinasabi lang niyang meron pong the domestic preference, so that more than 15% i-award kay domestic bidder. So we have to highlight this, not more than the approved budget for the contract because we have to still comply, diba, with the basic principle that we have under the Constitution, the Government Auditing Code of the Philippines, and of course, diba, as adopted in RA 9184. So hindi po pwedeng more than the approved budget for the contract. We cannot award more than the appropriations for that particular project. And then, The lowest calculated bid of the domestic bidder complies with and is responsive to all the requirements and conditions specified in the procuring entity's bidding document. So meaning, responsive po siya. We just had to highlight this. Hindi po kung meron kagad siyang certification within the 15%, within the ABC, 'di ba? Meron na kagad siyang i-award na po sa kanya. No. Kasi subject pa rin siya to post qualification. We have to make sure pa rin that the bidder complies with and is responsive to all the requirements and conditions. So meaning, diba, hindi lang po natin pine-prefer kasi hindi lang naman nga po tayo nagbibigay ng preference, but what we want is that we ensure also that we still buy the right quality. Diba? Not just because it's from a domestic bidder, but we are buying the right quality from a domestic bidder. Yan. So dapat po all fours are present. All four conditions. So these are just the illustrative examples that we have also indicated in our GPPB resolution. So for purposes of illustration, ito po yung how we apply the domestic preference rule. So for example, we have a lowest foreign bid, di ba? And we have a lowest domestic bid. Meron siyang domestic bidder certificate of preference from the DTI. So kung ang bid price po ni lowest foreign bid 2,653,360 pesos. And so if you apply the 15% maximum margin of preference hanggang 3,051,364 dapat yung bid price ni lowest domestic bid. So pasok naman yung kanyang bid price of 2,789,098 pesos. So it's still within the ABC of 3.5 million, within the maximum margin of preference of 3.51 million. Then the domestic preference rule is applied. So award to the lowest bid with domestic bid with a certificate of domestic bidder's preference from the DTI at the bid price of the lowest domestic bid. Yan. And then, pwede rin po kasing, yun nga, yan. More than 15% in excess of the lowest foreign bid siya, diba? And then, pwede po kasing within the ABC, pero more than 15% in excess of the lowest foreign bid. So, hindi pa rin po siya bibigyan ng domestic preference. So, kung 3.5 million po yung kanyang ABC, ito po yung offer ni lowest foreign bid. So, di po ba hanggang 3,051,000 lang po yung maximum margin of preference. So, kung 3,075,000 yung offer ni lowest domestic bidder, hindi na po siya pwedeng awarded pa rin. Kay lowest foreign bid pa rin po. Kasi nag-exceed na po siya ng maximum na 15% po na margin of preference. Yan. Or pwede rin pong gantong scenario. So, where the lowest calculated domestic bid is not more than 15% maximum margin of preference, or 15% in excess of the lowest foreign bid but exceeds the ABC. So, kung halimbawa, 3.5 million ulit yung ABC, ang lowest foreign bid is 3.1 million. So, kung tiningnan niyo po yung maximum margin of preference niya, it would be at 3,565,000 ang mangyayari. So, kahit po yung kanyang bid is within the maximum margin of preference, pero it's over the ABC by 10,000 pesos, hindi po siya pwedeng i-applyan ng domestic preference. Yan. So, award to the lowest foreign bid at 3.1 million. Now, pwede rin po kasing yung scenario po is that pareho po silang, di ba yung sinasabi nga, we look at the, pareho silang local supplier, tapos we have kumbaga, pwede rin po na siguro we have knowledge na yung kanilang product is domestically produced, pero wala naman po sila parehong domestic bidder certificate of preference. So meaning wala pong nagka-claim sa kanila ng domestic preference. Kasi yun po yung proof, di ba, that you are claiming for domestic preference. Yun din yung proof na substantially composed of articles, materials that are grown, manufactured, supplied here in the Philippines. So wala po kasi pareho silang DTI certificate of domestic preference, then the domestic preference rule is not applied. So you just award to the lowest calculated responsive bid at 2,653,360 pesos. So yun po yung mga scenarios na pwede pong mangyari. So dun lang po sa unang scenario, i-apply yung domestic preference. So for the posting requirements under RA 9184, so as I have mentioned earlier, kaya po may mga asterisk po yung si PhilJEP's website kasi pwede pong yung scenario po na to from the start, 'di ba, nag-shorten ng timelines, hindi po nakapag-post kay PhilJEP's website, hindi po kaya ng system because of the shortened timelines, hindi po ma-accept ng system, so mawawalan po ng posting kay PhilJEP's. Pero ipo-post pa rin po sa Procuring Entities website if available in any conspicuous place reserved for that purpose for the NOAA. And then for the notice to proceed, yan, ipopost pa rin po sa kay Procuring Entities website if available. And then, ang very much important po, of course, ito kasi nasa Bayanihan 2 provision or Section 4U itself. So, ito po yung talagang wag po nating kakalimutan. So, the procuring entity shall publish the following information and documents in the GPPB online portal and procuring entities website if available in any conspicuous place reserved for that purpose within 7 working days from the date of the acceptance of the award. So, you indicate the project name, the approved budget for the contract period, name of winning bidder, amount of contract as awarded, NOAA, date of award and acceptance, contract or purchase order. So, of course, for procuring entities that would be using yung shopping or small value procurement, then isasama po dito yung pong kanilang certification, 'di ba, na yung as to securing the most advantageous price to the government. So, yun. Now, ito po, I have mentioned this already earlier, so we have to repeat this kasi nga, yung pong sa Bayanihan 1, nagkaroon ng confusion ng computation kasi di ba ang nandun is yung 3-month effectivity period. Yan. So, meron pang computation na naganap. Pero dito, I think, what the Congress did para mas malinaw is that sinabi na niyang effective until the next adjournment of Congress or on December 9, 2020. So, yun lang po yung effectivity date ng conduct of procurement activities under RA 11494. So, similar with the Bayanihan 1 Act, we have that provision on ano ba yung magiging, kumbaga, reckoning date and also ano ba yung dapat mangyari by that date. So, by December 19, 2020, dapat po nakapag-issue na po tayo ng notice of award so during this effectivity period. So, we may still proceed with the contract implementation even after the said effectivity kasi nakapag-NOA na po tayo. But kung halimbawa pong nag-lapse na po yung December 19, hindi pa po natapos, hindi na po nakapag-issue ng NOA, so we cannot issue anymore later on. So what we have to do is to repeat the process under RA 9184. So yun po yung kumbaga end date. So we have to make sure, sabi ko nga, yan po yung isa sa mga kumbaga challenges kasi right now we're already October 5, di ba? So ilang months na lang po until December 19, 2020. So kaya po minabuti ng board na let's not reinvent the wheel anymore and let's not complicate things further by providing different set of rules na maguguluhan pa si procuring entity, maguguluhan pa si bidder, iba magkakaroon pa ng confusion on how we would adopt. So ito po yung in-adopt ni board para ma-apply din po yung domestic preference rules that we have and then of course we could still shorten the timelines given nga the scenario that we have to be able to implement by December 19. And kasama din naman po sa Section 4U, kung makikita nyo po yung provision as to hindi man siya related dun sa procurement process itself, but very relevant po kasi especially for new products, di ba? That the stakeholders may be or the different domestic bidders may be offering. So relevant talaga dito kasi yung registration with the FDA, di ba, yung license to operate also. And of course, yung pong registration if needed, di ba, with the DOST and also yung with the, of course, the issuance of the domestic bidder certificate. That's why there's also a mandate upon these agencies na ma-shorten din yung process in the issuance of this certificates or these licenses or these permits. Kasi in the end, kahit po i-shorten natin yung procurement process, kung mga bidders po natin, domestic bidders po natin, hindi rin nakakuha ng certificate, hindi rin nakakuha ng registration, hindi rin po nila na properly register yung kanilang mga product as needed under the technical requirements. Kasi hindi pa rin, sabi ko nga, di ba, dapat even if with the domestic preference rule, we should still ensure the quality. So, sila rin naman on their end, they are also addressing this provision and they're shortening the process as well. But yun, very important po yun, that we all know those provisions. So with that, yeah, so that would be the end of my presentation. Yun, if you have not followed us on any of our social media accounts, yan, plugin lang po. You can follow us or yung like our page on Facebook, that's Government Procurement PH. So, pwede nyo pong makita yung mga past webinars namin, especially for this domestic preference. Uh, we just held webinars last week for procuring entities, and we also had for suppliers. Ang maganda po for suppliers, we invited also the DOST, FDA, and the yung DTI. So kung hindi pa po natin din, kung we want to have an idea din on their processes, we could always look at our past webinars in our social media accounts. You could also subscribe to our YouTube channel, yung Government Procurement PH. We also have Twitter also, Government Procurement PH. So if you have questions po, hindi naman po ito nawawala na. So halimbawa, after this training, may question kayo na hindi po na-address or hindi nyo natanong, naisip nyo lang po, you could always drop them, your comments or your questions at slido.com using the event code hashtag Government Procurement PH as well. Yan. So with that, maraming salamat po. I think we will be having the open forum naman for your questions.
Thank you, Attorney Melissa.
Thank you.
Maraming salamat po, ma'am, sa presentation. No? I really appreciate your effort, especially with the GPPB's crucial role sa situation na to. Thank you po. Maraming salamat.
Thank you din po, sir, for inviting us and for always also giving us help and support every time po we issue these resolutions for, especially pertaining to Bayanihan 1 and Bayanihan 2.
Crucial, ma'am, ang tulong niyo sa amin kasi people often misunderstand. They think that we are purposely stopped or we are biased. So we know that we want the public to know to GPPB kung ano talaga yung batas. Kasi yung politicians kami, they make promises. Di ba? Kung gusto nila tumulong, they put it in the law. Huwag lang yung salita. Kasi at the end of the day, pag ginawa natin yung gusto nila, hindi nila sinabatas, kami ang liable. Yan yung patulong lang to this information to the public. So maraming salamat with all your efforts na educating the proposed bidders. We really appreciate that para at least they will understand. Maraming salamat, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you din po, sir.
Before we start our open forum, we would like to remind the participants to please register on the link provided. It is also located in our chat box. So we're going to start with our open forum. There are a few questions that the participants has given. Attorney Melissa. Attorney Melissa.
Sige po, go ahead.
For the first question po, during procurement planning, how do we know if the item we are to procure or bid has domestic preference? What if we conducted emergency procurement and found out later that there are suppliers claiming for domestic preference? That's the first question, Attorney.
Yan. I think the best way po to be able to know if a particular item would parang would have parang magkakaroon ng application of domestic preference is that siguro we could also coordinate with the Competitiveness Bureau of the DTI kasi they are the ones in charge of issuing domestic preference certificate. From the last webinar that we had last week, if I'm not mistaken, ang sinabi nila is around 30 pa lang po yung nai-issue nila na domestic preference na bidders, domestic bidders certificate of preference. So meaning 30 products pa lang po talaga din yung merong nagki-claim. I'm not sure kung 30 products kasi pwedeng of the same product tapos yung bidder nagki-claim for that, different bidders or different companies claiming preference for that. So yun po siguro, maganda po that we can coordinate with them. Ang alam ko din po is that they're planning to have a website similar to what other agencies have, like halimbawa po sa kay GPPB, di po ba merong online blacklisting online portal para madali lang po yung madali rin po nating makita, 'di ba? Yung when we validate this or we post qualify. So, I'm not sure kung magkakaroon na po sila anytime soon, but I know it's also in their pipeline para po madali din for us. Pero kung wala pa po nun, siguro we could just coordinate with them para din po alam din natin or we have an idea. Kasi sila rin po yung makakaalam nun. Lalo na po, kasi ang mahirap din po ngayon, sabi ko nga, we have this provision, pwede kasing, pwede rin pong sabihin nila na ito pala yung nai-issue pero meron pala pong nag-a-apply or mag-a-apply pa. Especially po na, ang alam ko po, iniklian din po nila yung period para po matapos or mabilis yung turnaround time for the issuance of the certificate. If I'm not mistaken din po, yung pagkakaalala ko doon sa lecture last week is that 10 days po yung kanilang turnaround time, 10 working days yata. So, pwede po kasing ngayon, nagtanong tayo, tapos meron pa rin. So, siguro ang unang-una po nating titingnan na lang din is before we adopt a different mode of procurement, if papasok po siya dun sa items that we have mentioned under 19-2020, especially po following the conditions under the Bayanihan to for itong mga critical products na to. And we have an idea also that there are really domestic suppliers for those particular items. Might as well use the process adopted for these to be able to apply the domestic preference rather than doing emergency procurement. So, yun po siguro yung mga dapat nating i-weigh. Kasi ito po nga, mahirap po kasi talaga yung situation po ngayon eh. Kasi para bang the way to go about it really is to make sure that we have market scanning. Kamukha yung sa prices po, di ba? At least we have to show na mayroong market scanning po that we have done for a particular item. Kasi talagang nagpa-fluctuate. So even the supply, nagpa-fluctuate because of the situation right now. Yun po. So, may question pa po?
There is a follow-up question po, attorney,
Sige po.
from Sir Dixon Panti po.
Apo.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Follow-up question lang dun sa question kasi it mentioned yung emergency procurement. But based on the circular 19-2020, it doesn't mention kasi yung emergency procurement. Pero sa 18, nakalagay doon yung reminder on the use of relevant procedures and requirements on circular 01-2020. How do we apply po yung emergency procurement in this case?
Ayan po. Actually, maganda po yung question po natin, no? I would just have to highlight kasi po, if you would look at 18-2020, very specific po siya talaga sa services and yung mga consulting services and infrastructure project. And then we mentioned there po, and then papasok din po kasi doon yung because of yung mga fisher folk, yung agricultural and fishery products. So, nandun po siya sa 18-2020. And then for COVID-19 related items, lahat po siya covered ng 19-2020. Kaya ang ano ko po talaga is If you would look at 19-2020, talaga pong ang process following the intent of Bayanihan 2, it's really more of applying the domestic preference and also yung pong applying the domestic preference rule and then of course sa competitive bidding process. Yun lang po talaga. So ngayon, matatanong po talaga kami, or actually this is the third time I was asked since we have the GPPB issued those resolutions. So paano naman yung ang tanong is that ibig sabihin ba hindi na po talaga pwede mag-emergency procurement? Or talaga bang dapat competitive bidding process? So kung ako po yung tatanungin nyo, hanggat hindi pa po, wala pa po kasi we would be issuing also NPM following the resolution, mag-i-issue po ang TSO ng NPM that would address also the frequently asked questions. So siguro po, ang maganda pong sagot dyan sa tanong na yun is really more of a harmonized interpretation, not just of the resolution, but also of the Bayanihan 2 provision itself. So, meron po kasing guidepost doon as to yung application of the domestic preference rule and also as to yung mga critical products. So, ang pwede po nga kasi talagang mangyari is that meron po talagang situation na when you look at your market study, wala naman talagang, hindi ka naman makakapag-apply ng domestic preference. Based on your market study, wala talaga. Diba? Wala talagang existing the domestic supplier or manufacturer for that particular product, and it's something that we have to already procure. So kung may mga ganun pong scenario, I think we are not precluded naman from applying po. Kasi ang intent really is to be able to apply the domestic preference and also to employ the competitive procurement procedure. But ang ano dun is that we have to make sure na meron din po tayong proof. Kasi other than that, hindi po natin ma-justify yung paggamit ng emergency procurement. Now, ang tanong is that, siguro ang tanong, kung emergency procurement for under 19-2020, will it be under Bayanihan 2 na under 18-2020 or under RA 9184? Again, very specific po kasi yung 18-2020 for the application of the Bayanihan 2. So the safer way is that the safer way to adopt po for goods kasi yun yung nasa 19-2020 and wala po talagang nasa 19-2020, then we have to apply po yung what we have to apply is yung siguro RA 9184. But we will take note of this question kasi it's really a good question and we will make sure to answer this also in our NPM para hindi din po tayo matakot na gawin po ito para may enough guidance po tayo. Yun po.
Another follow-up question po from Director of Procurement Group po, Sir Attorney Leong.
Director Attorney Yan, I have a follow-up question. Kasi it was mentioned that you might be crafting an NPM. It was discussed a while ago that the reason behind requiring competitive bidding under Bayanihan 2 is to help domestic bidders recover. Now, it was also explained that domestic bidders must have a certificate of preference from DTI. So they have to have a certificate of preference from DTI. What if no bidder has a certificate of domestic preference from DTI for the item that is bidded out? So pwede kasi natin yan malaman agad by simply asking DTI for a list of all the items that has a certificate of preference. So my scenario is, we already know for a fact that most of the items don't have local manufacturers here in the Philippines. So under GPPB 19-2020, I will be required to do competitive bidding for all our procurement. So maybe in our NPM, we can take into consideration the scenario that there is no manufacturer with a certificate of preference. I guess it's more of a comment than a question po.
Yes po. Actually yun po yung tama po kayo. Kaya yun yung sinasabi ko po na even if you look at 19-2020 and 18-2020 na wala po siyang kumbaga wala po talagang clear na rules as to paano naman kung walang kumbaga yun yung ganung scenario po. So that's why yun din po yung kumbaga sinagot ko po kanina na pwede po talaga kasi yung scenario na yun na totally wala palang local manufacturer. Kasi we would have that idea already from the start. So pwede pong ganun po siguro yung we will have to make sure that we also answer that because this is not just the first time that I was asked this question. Actually, this is the third time. And I anticipated na rin po talaga that I will be asked the same question. So yun po, ako ang tingin ko po even without still the NPM that we have, just harmonized interpretation lang po of the resolution kasi it's based naman din on the procurement provision. If we are able to make sure, parang meron tayong mapakitang document later on. Mawa lang po if we get questioned again na bakit ka nag-emergency procurement? Sabi sa 19-2020 competitive bidding. Tapos, but of course, iwi-weigh mo kasi yung scenario eh. You all know, we know na wala talagang domestic supplier. And then, may mga certain products talaga na wala po talaga, di ba? So, wala ding mag-a-apply ng domestic preference certificate. So, why waste time halimbawa na doing competitive bidding tapos wala rin naman. So, based na rin nga siya sa magiging market, natin, scanning and also, yun nga, consultation din siguro with DTI. But yun nga, we take note of the comment kasi it's really very important that we address it also. Para din, kumbaga, we don't have any qualms later on how we would apply given that particular scenario.
Opo. Ma'am, if I may add, even before the procuring entities market scanning, if we may suggest that DTI post an updated list of the items that have a certificate of domestic preference, parang pareho nung ginawa sa kay PSDBM na SINAS, kung ipiprint screen na lang yung website niya, maybe we can do something similar for DTI. Maybe we can ask them for a weekly update of the items that have a certificate of domestic preference. Because I already attended yung webinar nyo before. DTI yata, Director Santiago, was it Santiago, mentioned that there are 30 items with domestic preference. Pero po doon sa items na yon, I think it includes all the merchandise in the Philippines, not only yung COVID items natin. So maybe we can ask them to post yung COVID items with domestic preference so that the procuring entities can save time. And maybe, hopefully, GPPB can introduce a mechanism to harmonize yung use of possible emergency procurement. Kasi po lalabas, mas mabilis na po si 9184 na emergency procurement if we do competitive bidding for everything po.
So, yeah. Sige po, for yung DTI, we will coordinate with them siguro on how we would help facilitate lang din po yung how we are able to parang validate yung mga meron pong certificate. Now, yung as to the emergency procurement, basta ang una naman pong guidepost is that if it's covered by 19-2020, as mentioned, hybrid naman po siya. So, masya-shorten naman yung timelines. Now, pwede po kasing we might be thinking that it's covered by Bayanihan 2 pero hindi related lang to COVID-19 but not really covered by Bayanihan 2. So, may mga scenario po kasi na ganun. Hindi rin naman po tayo parang we're not precluded from applying emergency procurement modality under RA 9184. So siguro we will just take note also of this concern and this question para po mas ma-explain po natin ng maigi how we would go about it, yung mga different scenarios po that we have talked about today. Sige po.
Thank you, attorney. For the second question, who, who will sign a certificate that the procuring entity has exerted all efforts to secure the most advantageous price to the government?
For that po, it would have to be the head of the procuring entity. But of course, it's not the head of the procuring entity that would have made all the necessary, ano rin, di ba? Necessary parang exercise or yung ano yung mga, hindi naman si Hope mismo yung nag-conduct ng market scanning or tumingin dun sa mga different data coming from price data coming from the relevant government agency. So pwede, of course, magre-rely pa rin naman si Hope po dun sa ginawa halimbawa nung end user or kung sino man po yung delegated po na authority or delegated po na official or the back, di ba, that conducted the negotiated procurement or the shopping or the small value procurement. So, it would still be the hope kasi that would be parang a determination or certification also before, of course, the award is made or the contract is awarded. But based pa rin naman siya dun sa mga documentary requirements or yung mga ginawa coming from the end user or kung sino man pong delegated officials.
Thank you, attorney. For the third question po, for foreign bidders, do they need to register their product to Philippines FDA before they offer it in the Philippine market?
It would depend po. Meron po kasing mga certain products lang or items that have to be registered with the FDA. So, depende, yun yung dapat po nating tingnan dun sa base sa requirements kung kinakailangan ba ng FDA registration or certificate or yung license to operate. So, may mga certain products lang po kasi na kinakailangan. So, siguro we have to consult with the FDA or if we're procuring po kasi this for DOH, for example, we have to consult with them as well. So may mga kinakailangan po kasi. Like for example po, di ba dun sa vaccine, may mga certain requirements din po ang FDA for registration of the vaccine. Hindi po basta-basta po siya ma-register din with the FDA kasi meron dun mga different, kaya po yun in-address din sa Bayanihan to, di ba, yung as to clinical trials and all those things. So may mga kanya-kanyang requirements po depending on the product. So we have to make that consultation.
Thank you, attorney. For the next question po, some items do not have any local manufacturer with a certificate of domestic preference. For these items, can the procuring entity immediately resort to emergency procurement under Bayanihan Act, or do we still have to use competitive bidding?
I think this is similar with yung question po kanina, no? But yun nga, applying po kasi nga the 19-2020 that 19-2020 resolution, it would really appear po na we really have to kumbaga, we apply the competitive procurement procedure except for you if it's not if it would be covered by shopping or small value procurement. So yeah. So hindi as of now po kasi the presence of the domestic certificate of preference po would not be the determining factor whether we would apply the competitive bidding procedures or not. So yun po yung isasagot ko po sa ngayon kasi yun po yung nasa resolution po natin.
Thank you, attorney. For the next question, what is the difference from Bayanihan?
Ma'am, ako lang yung unahon ng isa. Ma'am, to clarify again, yung statement mo na hindi kailangan yung domestic preference sa certification, what is important is as far as PPP local, that is enough. Kailangan namin yung in writing ha, so we can use it as a basis kasi nagkakaroon ng gulong ngayon. Kasi yung iba, si DTI and si BOI, kailangan may domestic preference. Magagalit yung iba na local na hindi binibigyan kasi ang dami nila nag-a-apply, lahat, most of them are denied. Only 2 actually passed with respect to PPA items. So we will follow your guidance and we will also publish it. That will be our basis. Basta local ka, enough na yun.
Actually po, ganito po kasi para po ano tayo po kasi para po I don't want din kasi po to put PS na parang in a situation na you have to defend yourself pa rin po because of all these questions. Kasi parang we are trying to ask kung whether pwede po ang emergency procurement. So sabi ko nga po kasi pag tinignan niyo po yung resolutions, talagang ang intent po ni Congress is really more of yung I just want to clarify kasi wala pa rin po kami kumbaga as discussed earlier sa 18-2020 and 19-2020 wala pong nagsasabi doon as to the use of emergency procurement for this COVID-19 products. Talagang ang nakalagay po sa 19-2020 is really more of use of competitive bidding process because of the application of domestic preference. So, kaya na-mention ko din po kanina because of the question. So, kung talagang papasok po siya sa COVID-19, baka po we could address that in our NPM later on para po baka naman pwede pong harmonized interpretation. But given that we don't have that yet or wala po, para po safe po si PS, diba? Para hindi po tayo kumbaga mag-rely lang po doon sa kung anong mang interpretation but we could rely kung ano po yung nasa issuance po natin sa ngayon. Wag po siguro tayong mag-rely po doon sa certificate kasi siguro mas maganda po na we push for we still comply with the competitive bidding process. Anyway po, we could always have the alternative solutions like 'di ba nga mas shorted yung timelines kung yun po yung iniisip natin. We have naman po yung kumbaga pwede nating i-shorten yung pag-publish, pag-post, yung ganun po para in a way kahit na ano pong mangyari, safe po si PS. Di po ba? Yun po yung gusto kong i-stress. Whether may mag-claim or wala, kasi we will have an award naman po later on. Sabi ko nga, yung different scenarios or illustrative examples that we've shown in the resolution, that would already show na, kung halimbawa po yung situation na walang nag-present ng DTI bidder certificate. So no domestic bidder, no domestic preference would have to be applied. But we would still award to the lowest calculated and responsive bidder. So siguro yun na lang po yung titingnan po natin. Wag po tayo masyado mag-focus on kasi baka po naiiba yung focus natin ngayon ay parang yung mga focus po natin kasi baka pag dito tayo nag-focus hindi po tayo makapag-procure. We do not want that. Yung nagfo-focus po tayo sa DTI certificate, nagfo-focus po tayo paano makapag-coordinate kay DTI, parang naiiba po yung focus po ng questions po nung iba sa atin. Siguro, rather than focusing on having the presence of a DTI certificate, let's focus on how can we shorten the timelines given na ito yung naging market study natin. Hindi naman ganun ka-complicated yung technical specifications na pinoprocure natin. Ngayon, alam natin halimbawa na may dalawa lang na may domestic bidder certificate for this particular item. Pero alam natin na may mag-claim. All the more na yun po, yung sabi nga ni Ma'am, ni Sir, kailangan, kasi we really have to make sure that everything is above board, di ba? Especially for the PS. Lalo na po ang PS, naka-mention pa po tayo naka-mention talaga si PS po sa procurement provision po ng Section 4U. So, yun po siguro yung gusto ko pong i-highlight kasi yung pong mga tanong po natin, yung mga direction ng tanong po natin really more of how do we resort to emergency procurement. Yun nga yung sinasabi ko po kasi from the start kanina when I answered the questions, kung titignan po, wala po kasi talaga, very limit, yung 18-2020 emergency procurement under Bayanihan 2, it's just limited to it's just limited to services, infrastructure projects, and then we have the Sagip-Saka products, yung fishery and agriculture. Para po wala na rin po tayong, para po wag na po tayo mapunta dun sa situation that we have to explain ourselves siguro. Siguro yun po yung maganda po. Kasi alam ko po na ang concern po natin ngayon, kasi andyan yung emergency procurement under RA 9184, di ba? Gusto rin naman natin mabilis. Yun na nga, yun din po, meron mga certain items po kasi na kung hindi po siya papasok dun sa Section 4U, yun. We could use RA definitely without any justification, without any explanation. We could definitely use emergency procurement under RA 9184 kasi hindi naman siya pasok dun sa Section 4U items eh. Yun po, siguro yun po muna yung gawin po natin, kumbaga focus natin, especially given also the time that we have, it's, as mentioned, it's already October 5 and then hanggang December 19 lang po tayo. So, focus more on how we could do it given the rules on domestic preference and also the competitive procurement procedure. And para po wala na rin po yung issue. Para hindi na rin po tayo, hindi na rin po yung parang lagi po tayong natatanong na bakit ganito, bakit CPS, bakit ganyan. Kasi hindi din po nila naiintindihan, di ba, yung po, or hindi po naiintindihan po ng, siyempre, yung mga stakeholders. Tama po si Sir, ang sasabihin niyan, merong TTI, may BOI, merong domestic preference. Especially if this is really, this one was really supported also by the different agencies because yun nga ang sabi ko, because of the intent behind it, yung recovery. So not just procurement, but meron din pong other purpose for this particular provision. Yun po.
Thank you, Attorney. For the next question po,
Sige po.
for the next question po, is a new operated company can participate in an emergency procurement?
Ayan. So, tanong po natin dito is on emergency procurement under the Bayanihan 2 or under, parang both po siguro, no? I would just assume na yun po yung tanong. As to newly incorporated company, depende pa rin po kasi yan sa kumbaga, as a rule, depende po kasi sa scenario. But hindi naman po natin pinaprohibit ang newly incorporated company, especially po kung naka-incorporate na po siya bago pa po siya sumali. Di po ba? Kumbaga, from joining us. Meron lang po kasing mga certain scenarios na pwede po kasing hindi pa siya incorporated here kasi foreign pala siya, di ba? Parang joint venture bidder, tapos merong foreign company po na kasama joint venture partner. So, incorporated po siya dun sa kung saang foreign country. Pero definitely po kasi, whether it's emergency procurement or not, legal, dapat po meron siyang di ba, legally, technically, and financially capable supplier. So whether RA 9184 or whether under the Bayanihan 2, kung mapapansin niyo po, meron po kasing mga documents po, di ba? Meron po tayong documentary requirements na sini-streamline na lang for alternative methods of procurement para masabi nating legally, technically, and financially capable. Parang just to explain po. Noon pong prior to the 2016 IRR, pag alternative method of procurement, wala po yan, wala yung list of documentary requirements that we have in the Annex H. Wala po yan. Ang lagi lang pong nakalagay po doon sa Section 53.12 and then, or yung sa mga alternative methods of procurement, di ba? Dapat po, we directly negotiate with a legally, technically, and financially capable supplier. So, si procuring entity po yung nagde-determine before, prior to 2016 IR, ano yung mga documents na nire-require niya for alternative methods of procurement. para siya masabi niyang legally, technically, and financially capable. Now, so si procuring entity, in determining the documents, ibibase niya po yan dun sa legal, technical, and financial documents that we are requiring for the competitive bidding process, di ba? So, pwede pong, hindi po lahat yon. So, kung mapapansin nyo, ang inadapt po ni board dun sa 2016 IRR, very, na lang, minimum requirements kasi alternative methods of procurement po to to be able for you to determine the legal, technical, financial. So, for the legal, kung makikita nyo po, ang nandun po is yung mayor's permit. Di po ba? So, ngayon, even if mayor's permit lang po siya, it goes without saying na hindi naman po pwedeng yung mayor's permit. Kaya po yaan ang linagay ni board sa lahat po. Kasi we have sa legal documents, pag tinignan nyo po sa competitive bidding process natin, ang legal documents would be SEC, DTI, CDA certificate as maybe applicable. Yan yung number 1. Number 2, mayor's or business permit or yung equivalent document for the economic zones. Yan yung mga legal document. And number 3, yung tax clearance. Yan po yung tatlong legal document. So kung mapapansin nyo, among the 3 po, ang linagay ni board doon sa emergency procurement is mayor's permit. Bakit po mayor's permit? Kasi nung dineliberate po yan, ano ba yung pinaka enough na po para masabi mong may legal personality or legally capable si bidder to be able to to be able to join the bidding. That would be the mayor's permit. Bakit po yun yung sinabi ni board na enough na yung mayor's permit? Kasi hindi ka pwedeng makakuha ng mayor's permit kung wala ka pang DTI Certificate of Registration or SEC Certificate of Registration or CDA Certificate of Registration. Hindi ka rin pwedeng makakuha ng mayor's permit kung hindi ka pa registered with the BIR. Kasi those are documents that will be required of you when you apply for a mayor's or business permit. Diba ba? Kaya nga po sa business permit nakaano rin po 'yan kung ano yung business business name and all those things. So yun po yun. Kaya pwede po, newly incorporated company can participate in an emergency procurement so long as ma-present po niya, di ba, yung any of the documents that were mentioned, like mayor's permit, for example, yung kung for emergency procurement po kasi, di ba, we have also the mayor's permit, the business tax returns, di ba, latest business tax returns, and then we also have the OSS, and then for infrastructure project, di ba, we have the NFCC, and we also have the pickup license. So, di ba, yung NFCC, OSS, depende po sa threshold or sa amount ng ABC. So, yun po yung so, definitely po, kahit newly incorporated siya, pwede po siya.
Thank you, Attorney. For the next question, is electronic filing through EFES required in an emergency procurement or a manual filled ITR is enough?
Wala naman po tayong require po doon sa as to EFES filing for emergency procurement. So, ang require lang naman po natin would be the business tax return. So, I don't think meron po tayong require dyan under Annex H. So, both would, any of the two would be, would suffice. Especially po, we always follow po kasi rin what would be the issuance of the BIR. We don't want to limit it only to, sa EFPS, kasi hindi naman po lahat EFPS. Lalo na po ngayon. So, yun po.
Thank you, Attorney. Next question. Should a supplier be disqualified if it has penalty on its late filing of taxes? Should they be blacklisted after confirmation of such?
Dun po sa parang late, disqualified if it has penalties on its late filing of taxes. So, for the disqualification po kasi, depende po sa project. We only have naman kung ano po yung mga grounds for disqualification. If you would look at yung kung the grounds for disqualification, it's really more of dealing with any of the ongoing contracts po. Diba? Yung performance po ni bidder in any of the its ongoing contracts, kung may slippage, may delay in the delivery, mostly po doon po doon po siya focus. Now, yun po kasing yung pong mga documentary requirements natin related to tax. Well, we don't really look at yung whether merong penalty po siya or not. Ang titingnan po natin is that whether nakapag-comply po siya dun sa, halimbawa, submission of the latest business or business tax returns, diba? Or yun nga, if ang requirement naman po, if we're talking about competitive bidding process, diba, ang require po natin as to tax returns would be yung tax clearance, and then we also have the AFS, we also have the business tax returns as post qualification documents. We really do not look at the penalties. What we look at is na the bidder is able to comply. So, yun po yun. So, I don't think it would be a ground for disqualification if nakapag-comply naman siya. Kasi, yung pagbayad naman niya ng penalty, yun na yung penalty sa kanya for late filing of taxes. Kumbaga, ano na niya po yun kumbaga sa tax issue po siya. It's not really more of a procurement issue. Now, as to whether pwede po natin siyang i-blacklist or not, we have to also look at the grounds for blacklisting. So, kung papasok po siya with any of the grounds for blacklisting, so, pwede po siyang ma-blacklist. Pero ngayon po, siguro, I could not remember all of the grounds for blacklisting, pero wala po akong makita na sigurong kumbaga clear-cut na talking about tax issues as a ground for blacklisting. Pero baka po kasi it can be related to other grounds po eh. So, nasa sa atin po yun kung how we would assess po the situation and then look at the grounds for blacklisting para po ma-initiate po natin yung blacklisting process. Especially yung related po sa competitive bidding process. Yun po yung titingnan po natin grounds for blacklisting.
Thank you, Attorney. For the next question, for DPPB, Resolution Number 18-2020 approved the use of relevant procedures and requirements under GPPB Circular Number 01-2020 for Bayanihan. Does this mean the procurement entity can still apply special repeat order, award to several suppliers, verbal negotiation, and etc.?
Again, para po wala po muna tayong confusion kasi as mentioned po kanina, 18-2020 is very limited to the application of the Bayanihan 2 or GPPB Circular Number 1-2020 only to services, consulting services, and infrastructure projects. So, hindi and then also may provision siya on yung agricultural and fishery products but not on goods kasi yung goods po natin ang applicable po doon is 19-2020. So hindi po natin pwedeng i-apply si special repeat order po considering po na under 18-2020 application po ni GPPB Circular Number 1-2020 is only for yung pong ating services, consulting services, and infrastructure projects.
Thank you, Attorney. The next question. If a particular COVID-19 item has no local supplier or manufacturer that can secure DTI certification for domestic preference, can the P apply GPE Circular Number 01-2020 instead of GPE Number 19-2020? How does the PE identify which rule to follow for Bayanihan 2? Should the PE wait for DTI list or certified suppliers?
Ayan. So, ayan. I think this is similar po dun sa mga questions earlier on that I really have to parang make a clarification. Ayun. I think po parang ang more of a concern really natin is that parang we want how can we apply the Bayanihan 1, yung Circular 1-2020 or yung emergency procurement under Circular Number 1-2020 or emergency procurement in itself for COVID-19 related for COVID-19 item that has no local supplier or manufacturer that can secure DTI certification for domestic preference. Now, kasi ayoko rin pong pangunahan po yung ano po yung lalabas din po natin na NPM kasi sinasabi ko nga, siguro nakikita ko po yung sense na pinanggagalingan ng mga tanong po natin. Kasi parang, what's the sense of having to go through the process if wala namang wala namang domestic bidder na magkiklaim ng preference. But again, siguro, para po hindi tayo ma-stuck dun sa issue na wala namang domestic bidder, wala namang certificate of preference, tapos i-push natin yung mag-emergency procurement rather than follow what's in 19-2020. I wouldn't want din po to say na you go ahead and procure under Bayanihan yung Circular 1-2020 kasi very clear po si 18-2020 and very clear si 19-2020 unless we would say siguro na yun nga sabi ko emergency procurement under RA 9184 pero hindi din po kasi siya sinabi under 19-2020 ang highlight lang po ni board is yung small value procurement and yung pong shopping. So hanggat wala po siguro tayong kumbaga an interpretation to support this, to support na yung kung pwede nating gawin ang under emergency procurement, I would highly suggest na we focus not on how we would use Circular 1-2020, but we focus more on how we would use 19-2020. So yun po siguro yung tamang gawin natin, especially sa PS, para po hindi po mag-bog down yung procurement natin. So as mentioned, we focus on the provisions under 19-2020 hanggat wala po. Yung po kasing nasabi ko kanina na pwede pong siguro I would have to take note of the question, baka po ma-discuss po natin sa NPM kasi nakikita ko po where we're coming from. Nakikita ko po yun. But kasi ayoko rin po naman na wala pa tayong NPM tapos sabihin po ni PS, sinabi mo mag-issue ng NPM or hintayin na lang namin yung NPM bago kami makapag-procure. Which should not be the case as well. Kasi yung NPM po, talagang interpretation lang din po siya to give us guidance. So, at the end of the day, it would have to be the procuring entity pa rin making the decision and given what we have in the rules. So, siguro the best way is to make sure we focus more on how we can use 19-2020 even if wala silang domestic preference certification. Siguro yun po yung kasi in any case kahit po naman halimbawa it's competitive bidding process di po ba under our rules naman even under our unit for kahit isa lang po yung sumali you may proceed. And then all those things, walang nag-claim ng preference. And then we award to the lowest foreign bid. Para po, kumbaga at least, alam din po natin na we follow din po the procedure that that Congress intended for us to use. Kasi nga, meron po siyang provision on domestic preference. But yun po, given na pangatlo na po ito within the session, I would talaga pong I recognize po the importance of this question. But yun po yung sagot ko po sa ngayon. Kasi ayoko pong maging cause po ito ng further delay din on the procurement process of PS. But ayoko rin kasi mapulaan din. Pero we really take note po this question.
Attorney Yan, if I may comment lang po. Ang kasi namin, maybe we can harmonize pa rin yung rule on emergency procurement and yung competitive bidding because even Bayanihan 2, it provides the same wording as Bayanihan 1. Yung, procuring entities are allowed to procure as exemptions to RA 9184 in the most expeditious manner. It only provides later on the provision for competitive bidding. So we are hoping that maybe we can harmonize those two provisions there is no item that has a certificate of domestic preference po. That's what we are hoping. Kasi po, ang concern lang po ni PSDBM is we are being asked to procure most of the items for DOH hanggang December 19 po. And then in our experience po doon sa Bayanihan 1, we used Bayanihan 1, we used emergency procurement. It took us 6 days. It took us 6 days and we couldn't procure the items as fast as we wanted, as fast as DOH wanted. So that 6 days, it wasn't enough. Kaya we requested for Bayanihan 1. Dito po sa Bayanihan 2, if we do competitive bid, yung counting po ng back namin, it will take us around 14, 17 days to issue a notice of award. So that's double yung 6 days namin sa 9184. So we are really concerned po, baka hindi namin mabili yung dapat bilhin, especially po sa testing kits. Kaya I think most of my back members are raising yung questions on what if there's no item that has a certificate of preference. Can we still use Bayanihan? Can we still use emergency procurement? Can we still use yung verbal agreement? Kasi it happened po talaga before na hinihingi na yung item, hindi pa namin na nabibili po. So right now, sinasabihan na namin si USEC, hindi namin magagawa na po yun. Pag may hiningi na testing kits, we will have to wait for 14 to 17 days po. And that's really a concern po. Doon lang po galing.
Yes, well, actually, I do understand po the concern, sir. That's why siguro at least ang maipapangako ko other than yung mga answers ko po ngayon is that of course I would really highlight these questions. Itong mga question po na to kasi sabi ko nga hindi lang rin po kayo yung unang nagtanong sa akin yan. Natanong din po ako last week, twice po ako natanong on that. But yun nga, ang sagot ko po lagi is really is more of yung stricter interpretation. Kasi I don't want din naman to provide you with an interpretation na later on you would have to, yun nga, sabi ko nga kanina, kung halimbawa pwede mong gawin yun, harmonized interpretation, but at the end of the day, you will really have to justify din, just like by providing documents. And we wouldn't really know then what will happen. Kasi sabi ko rin po nga, similar with the way when we issue NPMs, yun po yung lagi namin din sinasabi sa mga agencies, even if we issue NPMs, at the end of the day, it's always the procuring entity that would make the decision and would later on kumbaga justify yung pong circumstances why they reach that decision kasi yung pong accountability yun din making the decision would still be with the procuring entity. But on the part of the GPPBTSO po, I would really take note of all these questions. Actually, habang nga pong nagtatanong po kayo, yun, tinitake note ko na po siya na talagang dapat po man-discuss po. Yun po. May question pa po?
Yes po, attorney. There are a few more questions. So the next question po, attorney, is, are the following not required since these were not mentioned under 19-2020? Invitation of observers, request for consideration or protest mechanism, pre-procurement conferences, etc.
Actually, part pa rin po to ng competitive bidding process, so we would still adopt the same. Yun lang nga, as mentioned, yung as to the different periods, hindi na po, kumbaga, we have the leeway to reduce po the period, especially sa invitation of observers, di po ba may period din po siya, and dahil ang leeway po sa atin ng 19-2020 is that yung mga mandatory periods or yung mga periods po that we have to comply with, pwede pong i-streamline. So, yun siguro po yung mga pwede po natin i-change. But they're all still part of the competitive bidding process. Yan. Yun po.
Thank you, Attorney. So we're going to have a 5-minute break before we continue with the open forum. Thank you, Attorney.
Okay, sige po.